In this news brief, we'll be talking about child labor in Asia and how it violates human rights. I'm here with other newscasters talking about the subject, along with an interview with Megan Compton. Dominique, why don't you start us off with an introduction of child labor?
Asia Pacific enjoys a reputation as a vibrant economic zone and a beautiful scenic region, but it is also home to more working children than any other region in the world. An estimated 122 million, or 9.3%, of children in the region aged 5 to 14 years are compelled to work for their survival. Millions are not enrolled in school at all. The majority of these violations are due to poverty. Also, many of the children that are forced to work these horrible conditions and not receive an education are orphans who have no one else in their lives to support them, so they must support themselves. Child labor is defined in ILO conventions as work that children should not be doing because they are too young to work, or because it is dangerous or otherwise unsuitable for them. Not all work done by children can be classified as child labor. Children participation in work that does not affect their health or personal development or interfere with their education is generally regarded as something positive. Whether or not particular forms of work can be called child labor depends on the child's age, the type and hours of work performed, and the conditions under which it is performed, as set out in the ILO conventions. Under Convention number 138, it talks about the minimum age for each category of labor. Hazardous work, meaning any work which is likely to jeopardize children's health, safety, or morals, should not be done by anyone under the age of 18. Light work is allowed for children between the ages of 13 and 15 years old, as long as it does not threaten their health and safety or hinder their education or vocational orientation and training. Convention number 182 on child labor defines these worst forms to be prohibited to all persons under 18 years as 1. All forms of slavery or practices similar to slavery, such as the sale and trafficking of children, are prohibited. 2. The use of procuring or offering of children for prostitution or for the production of pornography is prohibited. 3. The use, procuring, or offering of children for illicit activities, in particular for the production and trafficking of drugs as defined in the relevant international treaties. 4. Work which, by its nature or the circumstances in which it is carried out, is likely to harm the health and safety or morals of children is prohibited.
Thank you, Dominique, for that information. Now I'll pass it over to Olivia Henderzak, one of our newscasters at this station. Our own newscaster, Olivia Henderzak, recently came back from a trip from Asia, where she witnessed firsthand the poverty and the other causes of child labor.
There are many causes of child labor. Employers want cheap labor, so they hire children and pay them little to nothing. Poor children and their families may rely upon child labor in order to improve their chances of attaining basic necessities. The intensified poverty in parts of Asia caused many children there to become child laborers. Most children in these poorer sections have no access to education, limiting future opportunities for the children and their communities. A 2009 report by the United Nations estimated that achieving universal education for the world's children would cost 10 to 30 billion, about 0.7% to 2% of the annual cost of global military spending. Child labor laws around the world are often not enforced or include exemptions that allow for child labor to persist in certain parts, such as agriculture or domestic work. Even in countries where strong child labor laws exist, labor departments and labor inspection offices are often underfunded and understaffed, or courts may fail to enforce the laws. Also, many state governments allocate few resources to enforcing child labor laws.
So how does Asia specifically violate these conventions set forth by the ILO in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
Child labor in Asia violates many articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 4 of the Declaration states that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. For example, children are trafficked into one form of labor, may be later sold into another, as with girls from rural Nepal who are recruited to work in carpet factories but are then trafficked into the sex industry over the border in India. In Asia, children often work as domestic servants. They get paid with basic necessities like a place to live or food in return for work or other acts that the employees request. The poverty that a lot of children in Asia face leave them vulnerable. Article 5 says that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. There are more than 21 million child laborers in South Asia that face a wide array of hazards, from rotting waste in garbage dumps to hazardous dust in stone quarries to harsh chemicals used to tan leather. Children working in carpet factories in Nepal spend day after day doing detailed handwork, often develop arthritis, respiratory illness, and stress-related injuries. Because children are developing physically and mentally, harmful substances have a greater impact on them than adult workers. In Bangladesh, children work waist-deep in leather tanning chemicals and scavenge in garbage dumps. Leather tanning is one of the dirtiest jobs imaginable, carried out in tumbling barrels or large tubs full of toxic chemicals. In spite of these hazards, children work immersed in tanning fluids or climb into large tanning drums to remove partially tan hides.
And I'll just read some specific articles. Article 23, everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. It also states everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented if necessary by other means of social protection. Article 24 says that everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. Obviously, they don't get any of those because they are worked a lot.
Yes, they work numerous hours a day.
Article 26 then states that everyone has a right to an education and it shall be free in elementary or fundamental stages. So obviously if they're working in the factory they won't have time to go to school. In spite of numerous laws and treaties, child labor remains an enormous problem around the world and in Asia. Millions of children lack access to basic education, and they cannot further educate themselves to get themselves out of these labor jobs. Earlier this week, I interviewed Human Rights Watch Director Megan Compton on the challenges for the eradication of domestic child labor. I'd like to play that interview for you now. Hi, Mrs. Compton. As a representative at the Global Conference on Child Labor, I'd like to interview you on the topic of child labor. From the last Global Conference on Child Labor in 2010 to today, what were the main measures taken to reduce the number of children performing activities considered hazardous?
One of the worst forms of child labor is the recruitment of children for armed conflicts. Over 20 different governments and armed groups closed formal agreements with the United Nations to end the recruitment of children to participate in conflicts. As a result, thousands of children were released from these groups and reintegrated into society. This was an important change over the past 20 years, one which gives us hope for improvement. Also, since then, many laws and treaties have been put in place in hope to prevent child labor from reoccurring.
So what specifically characterizes child domestic labor?
Especially for girls, domestic work is one of the most common forms of labor activity. In some countries, 8 to 9-year-old girls from poor, rural areas are recruited to work in the homes of the wealthiest families in the city, especially in Asia. People have the idea that these children are treated as family members and are allowed to attend school, as they are often promised. But the truth is that they are exploited and physically abused. Few are given the chance to continue studying.
What specifically makes child labor so difficult to battle?
Child labor is hidden, and this is one of the most difficult issues in combating it. These children are in private eye, and there is a lack of oversight to check working conditions. These children are the mercy of their employers. Some treat them well, but others will abuse them. The work overload is often exhausting, and without any breaks. In addition, these children are adolescents and far from their family and friends, and have no one to turn to in case they are suffering abuse. Many do not even know their rights or what agency to contact. These factors make it difficult to identify these children and establish a correct intervention.
In your opinion, what are some necessary reforms in order to reduce or even eradicate child labor?
A very important step was taken in 2011 when members of the International Labour Organization, also known as the ILO, adopted Convention 189 on decent work for domestic workers. This was the first convention that defines the guaranteed rights for domestic workers at the same standards as those of other workers. The convention includes preventions, such as the determination of a minimum age requirement, and that the activities do not interfere with the studies of adolescents in the case of workers above the minimum age.
And so that you may educate the public on the problems of child labor around the world.
It was my pleasure.
I'd like to thank Megan Compton for taking time out of her day and helping educate the public on that interview.
Yeah, that interview went great. She was right when she said that Convention 189 was a very important step for reducing child labor and setting standards.
Can you think of anything else that has specifically been done in Asia?
Well, in 2013, countries in Asia and the Pacific passed legislation or ratified international standards to protect children against the worst forms of child labor. Laws were strengthened to address trafficking of persons in Fiji, India, Kazakhstan, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, and Thailand. Maldives ratified ILO Conventions 29, 105, 138, and 182, which covered forced labor, the minimum age for work, and the worst forms of child labor. Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Fiji, and the Philippines established or made amendments to a list of hazardous occupations prohibited to children. 4 countries initiated new tracking systems for enforcement of child labor laws. Fiji established a national child labor database, and India launched the criminal tracking and networking system, which connects all 15,000 police stations and enables police to better monitor trends in serious crimes, including trafficking. At least 5 countries in Asia also initiated social programs addressing child labor more broadly. Cambodia piloted a new cash scholarship transfer program through a mobile banking system to encourage children to remain in school. The Philippines implemented the Convergence program against child labor to work with local governments in creating child labor-free communities. Thailand, in cooperation with the Thai Frozen Foods Association and the ILO, created the Good Labor Practices program that promotes training and good practices for the prevention and elimination of forced child labor and the general improvement of workplace conditions at all points in the shrimp and seafood processing supply chain. Despite these efforts, significant obstacles to progress remain, particularly in the areas of legal protections related to minimum age, hazardous work, intra-government coordination, and enforcement. 7 countries in the region have compulsory education ages that are below the minimum age of work, which may make children more vulnerable to the worst forms of child labor. 4 countries and 3 territories do not have a mechanism to cooperate actions on child labor, and a majority of those that do have a weak coordinating mechanism. Eradicating child labor is hard, and it's a long battle. Other countries are fighting along with Asia because it is not specifically in this area, but it's still a large concern in Asia. In order for child labor to stop, there needs to be a global effort. There needs to be stricter laws and enforcement on what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Many have estimated that it would cost $760 billion over a 20-year period to end child labor. The estimated benefit in terms of better education and health is about 6 times that, over $4 trillion in economies where child labor is.
I'd like to personally thank everyone for tuning into this special edition of the news where we discuss child labor in Asia. And now I will leave you with this video of Walmart actually uses child labor for some of their products, and you will see a specific work order that they have given to a factory. The country of Nepal is one of the worst offenders when it comes to child labor. Though child labor is illegal in Nepal, an estimated 1.6 million children between the ages of 5 and 17 are in the workforce. Many are employed in carpet, brick, and garment industries, or in private homes as domestic workers. About 60% of the children in the workforce work up to 19 hours a week, while 30% work 20 to 40 hours a week. About 88.7% of the working children are being employed in the agricultural sector. Due to the severity of this issue, there are several non-governmental organizations that are based in Nepal to tackle the problem of child labor. They do this by improving educational standards. An example of an organization is Educate the Children, which is an international organization. Educate the Children is an international non-profit organization that was set up by Pamela Carson in 1990. Their objective was to help disadvantaged children in Nepal. It focuses on educating children and empowering women. Since 2009, some 4,100 children have benefited from improvements in school infrastructure and quality of teaching.